Okay, councillors, we'll resume the meeting of the 26th of Tuesday, the 26th of March, which everyone will be aware was adjourned due to a lack of quorum. Having resumed the meeting at the juncture at which it was adjourned, we're now up to voting on item 1, for which there was a tabled primary motion and a foreshadowed motion. There is no further debate to be had on that matter because a right of reply had been made by the mover, myself. So there being no further debate,
Sorry, Mayor.
Councillor, yes.
Because I've now had the opportunity to seek some legal advice in relation to this, I can't see, is the amended point, is point 4 still going ahead as part of the motion?
It is.
Yeah, so that's a significant pecuniary interest for me, and I'll exempt myself from the chamber for that vote.
If you'd like to leave the chamber. I'll now put...
I'm in a similar position, so unless it's moved in seriatim, I'm in the same boat.
It won't be. So Councillor Hesse and Councillor Lockie are both declaring a significant non-pecuniary interest in the item and absenting themselves from the chamber. I'll now...
I think they're declaring...
No. I'll now put the...
I have a disclosure. I've been instructed to act for Councillor Hesse as on a pro bono basis, which means that I'm acting for him for free. So that is a significant non-pecuniary interest.
Will you be absenting yourself?
No.
No.
I don't think I need to.
Right. Okay, I'll now put the primary motion moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Passis. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That has been carried. Next item, item 2. Post-exhibition report 120C Old Canterbury Road. Councillors. Councillor Macri.
Chair, I'll move the recommendation.
Moved by Councillor Macri, seconded by Councillor Passis. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Macri?
I think the site inspection allayed many people's fears, and I don't think there's anything more that really needs to be said at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Passis, do you wish to speak to it? No, I don't. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion or to amend it?
Can I just speak to the motion? So when this VPA was reported to us confidentially, I didn't support it, and it's come back in the same form. I'm going to support it now, but I guess I just want to explain that position. I think that at the time we did have an opportunity to try and negotiate a better VPA, and I think that I think that it would be great if we could have had more affordable housing as part of this VPA. That's something that I always want to see when we're negotiating with developers about their contributions. But I think at this stage, we don't really have an opportunity to go back and negotiate that. But I think that overall, when we are negotiating VPAs, I'd like to see us focus on affordable housing contributions.
Okay, thank you for that. If there's no further discussion, I'll go to Councillor Macri for a right of reply. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried unanimously. Next item, item 4, post-exhibition report, draft Marrickville Local Environment Plan 2011. Oh, sorry, item 3, 120C.
Mayor, may I move item 3?
Yes.
I would like to thank the officers for this report and wholeheartedly endorse the recommendation herein. I'd also like to thank the proponent for continuing to work with council to get the best possible outcome for that site. It may not be the absolute best outcome, but it is the best possible outcome, and I think that he should be congratulated for that, and the officers for the work that has gone into this. This is a matter that has been around now since the Ashfield LEP, a good long time, and it's good to see it come to a head.
Okay. Thank you for that. Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor McKenna. Do you wish to speak to it? Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion? Councillor Kiat.
I'd like to put forward an amendment which I think just captures the discussion we've had around this since it came to us, I guess, a month ago. There were concerns by residents about and the users of the childcare centre in relation to construction impacts, in relation to traffic and parking and overshadowing. I think it's important that we note now that we've heard those concerns and that we're constrained in our ability to refuse the planning proposal on the basis of some of those concerns. For example, the amount of solar access that we can require at this stage is constrained. We couldn't make it much greater, so we've obtained what we can.
Accepted.
And I'd just like to see that, to note that we can try to address those concerns at the DA stage and note our intention to do so.
Okay, that's been accepted into the primary motion and will become point 7. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak against the motion or to amend it? Councillor Passis, then Councillor Lockie.
No, I just am so glad that everyone's happy with what's happened, and I just hope that in not too distant future that we amend the whole former Ashfield LEP 13. That LEP needs thrown out straight into the rubbish, and I hope we amend it in the best interest of other residents.
Councillor Lockie.
Yeah, I'd just like to add an amendment which I've sent through. It essentially just says that we write to the Minister for Transport to re-emphasise the urgent need for additional light rail services in the area, which are already at capacity during peak times.
Okay, that's been incorporated as point 8. There's no further discussion. I'll put the primary motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 4. Post-exhibition report, draft Marrickville Local Environment Plan 2011. Councillor Macri? Councillor Macri will move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Lockie. Anyone who wishes to speak against the motion? Councillor Lockie wishes to speak to it.
I've just got a couple of amends, which again I've sent through. These amends are just designed to reflect some of the concerns that have been raised during the process. And I should note that they are actually addressed within the officer's report, but we were contacted by a number of residents, particularly around St Peters, who didn't really understand the planning language that was used there. So all I'm seeking to do with these amends is to clarify that we support the removal of the proposals to zone land around Campbell Street St Peters as classified roads, because there are houses there at the moment, and the proposals to zone land in Enmore and Dulwich Hill as roads as well, for the reasons outlined in the report, and again with point 3 that we push the RMS to try and get them to release the reservations they've got on land in the St Peters area.
Councillor Macri, were you willing to incorporate those amendments into the primary motion?
Yes, sure.
They're incorporated into the primary motion. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against that motion? If not, I'll go to Councillor Macri for a right of reply.
That's fine, Chair.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Item 5. Code of
Mayor,
Meeting
may I
Practice.
move the recommendation as printed?
Moved by Councillor Drury. Is there a seconder for that? I'll second it. Seconded by myself. Councillor Drury, do you wish to speak to it?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This code has gone through one fairly protracted debate on this council, and we came up with the will of the council in relation to it. It then went out on public exhibition. I've got to say there wasn't an avalanche of residents responding to the request for comment in relation to it. I think the draft code, as presented, reflects, I suppose, the middle ground of views on this council, and I think we should put it forward and adopt it.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion or to amend it? Councillor Kiat.
Can I just start with a question through the chair to the general manager?
Chief Executive Officer.
The Chief Executive Officer, when did that happen? My question is about the order of business. recently you circulated a memo about how in future you're intending that items on the agenda be dealt with. I know that the Code of Meeting Practice also deals with that same issue. I'm just wondering whether those two processes have run in tandem, or whether we're intending to amend the Code of Meeting Practice again at a later date.
I'll put that question to the CEO.
We're just working through that at the moment, Councillor, and we'll come back to Council and provide some more further detail.
Councillor Kiat?
Yeah, I'd just like to put forward a few minor amendments. I agree with Councillor Drury that generally, we had some debate on this, we had some amendments, and I think that, that reflected, I guess, the majority at that time. I think that there are a few minor changes that we could usefully look at, and I'll run through them quickly. The first two are quite minor. In the section relating to the public forum, there's a limitation on the number of items any individual person can speak to. I don't think we've never had an instance of someone coming to speak to 5, 6, 7 items, but I can imagine, an instance in which someone might want to speak to 4, and I don't think that we should have this arbitrary limit that you can only speak to 3. It hasn't been a problem, so I don't think we should introduce that limitation. Clause 411 has the words, the time limit on public speakers is to be strictly enforced by the chairperson. Now, that wording isn't used anywhere else, although there are limitations on the time that councillors may speak. So I don't think it's appropriate that we have, an extra punitive clause in relation to speakers from the public gallery. So I think we should just remove that. Obviously, the chairperson will enforce the time limits as he always does. The final point is in relation to the arrangement of the order of business. I think that obviously we've heard from the CEO that we're planning to look at that issue again, but I want to put it out there. I know we've had this debate many times, but I'd just like to deal with it now because I think it really would be useful if we could clarify that we deal with items of business that were dealt with during the public forum as quickly as we can in the agenda. And generally we want to do that so that people who have come to speak can hear the item they've spoke to as quickly as possible, so that, if they do want to hear that item, they can head home afterward. I know that we have done that on some occasions, and I think it's worked well. We generally do that where we feel that for some particular special reason, someone should be able to get home, whether they have young kids with them. But I think it would be good to put that into our order of business because I think it shows respect to those who come to speak. And generally, they've come a long way and they'd like to hear the debate on their item and see what decision is made by council. So the amendment is simple, that we just insert a new item on the order of business, the standard order of business, that is that items of business addressed during public forum are dealt with before the staff reports.
There is a challenge for us with Councillor Kiat's amendments because they refer to a paper that is not actually before us. So this will be a bit of a test for the council officers. Under the new format, there's only a link to the actual code. I'm wondering whether we could get that up before us so that councillors could be fully familiar with exactly what words what deletions Councillor Kiat is proposing. So I'll just put that as a question on notice. Further discussion? Councillor Porteous.
To be honest, as I think most of the councillors are aware, I don't think the public forum at the start of the meeting is a good process for the community because basically putting all of the issues up front really doesn't enable a proper debate of the issues in the chamber while those items have been presented by the community members. So I am further proposing that we remove the public forum and replace with existing provisions regarding registered speakers so that what we would in fact do, and I've just forwarded that to the minute taker, is add the following: items for which people are registered to speak are brought forward and dealt with before other items on the agenda. Items where there are small children present are prioritised and dealt with before other items. And that be a further amendment to the Code of Meeting Practice.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillors, further discussion. Councillor Passis.
I don't like any of this, and I believe residents have a right to speak on every issue that comes to council. Excuse me, please.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Passis has the floor.
But the whole reason that we have to we're bringing this forward is because we have councillors up here that play politics. You are you're stacking the branches with your mates to come up here. If I have to hear about Westconnex anymore, I think I'll go to the Gap. We had 10 speakers, all saying the same thing at every meeting on Westconnex. Something had to be done. When you want to play politics and you're using the residents to come up here to do it to make you look like a hotshot, something had to be done. There were people up here with issues about their street, their garbage, a tree, issues that we're here for, but then we had 90% of the councillors playing like they're big hotshot state and federal members. So I believe my background, we're the inventors of democracy, and I believe that everyone should be allowed to speak on any issue, and 20 people if they wanted to, but not at this council, not at the games that have been played up here. So please don't use democracy as the reason that you don't want to accept what's before you.
Thank you for that. I'll just ask whether the officers have had any luck identifying the clauses, and maybe I could ask you just to identify them one by one, the clauses that Councillor Kiat's amendments refer to.
Through the Chair, the first amendment Councillor Kiat had moved was clause 4.3. Currently the clause talks about the limitation on the number of items a person can speak to, and the recommended amendment deletes the limitation at all, so it just says that people may register to speak on agenda items.
Okay, I'll come back to the officers, have another go at that. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Stamoulis?
Mr Mayor, just a question through the chair. The one thing that brought our council meeting to a collapse last week and brought all council business to cease was the construction of motions. And I would like to ask the question: what comments does the Code of Meeting Practice say about the construction of motions and the coherence of those motions? And then I would like to speak further. Thank you.
That's an extraordinarily broad question, councillor.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
The Code of Meeting Practice in its entirety is about the construction of motions, or at least in large part. Do you have a more specific question?
Well, then it wasn't very effective then, was it, last meeting?
When you breached the Code of Conduct by walking out and leaving the meeting in court, no, that was unfortunate.
No, what I'm suggesting here is it allowed you to put a motion forward that was actually two separate issues of business.
What's your question, councillor?
The question here is the Code of Meeting Practice silent on the construction of motions, and whether or not motions should be brought to council without substantive reports and the like, which is, I believe, what was done last week. So it seems to put us in the position where you can construct motions to bring meetings to a halt and to see our meetings collapse.
This is a comment, not a particularly coherent
one. The question's not answered, so it doesn't really speak to that at all.
So can I clarify? The question is, what does the Code of Meeting Practice say about the construction of motions? We could be here for 4 hours.
And in particular, the very first motion this evening, was exactly that same issue again. Yeah.
I'm going to rule that's a comment. Councillors, further discussion. Councillor Hesse?
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to speak in favour, indeed, of both Councillor Porteous and Councillor Kiat's amendments. I think particularly in relation to 4.3, which is up on our screens now, that a person may apply to speak to no more than 3 items of the business on the agenda of the council meeting. While it may seem extraordinary, and I've not actually seen it in my time on Marrickville Council previously or on this council, there can be times, and a friend of mine did a term on a council in the St George area, I won't name it, where there was a limit of where a person could only speak on one agenda item per quarter. And I think this kind of thing is heading in the wrong direction. I actually agree with Councillor Passis that, in fact, a person should be allowed to speak on as many items as they wish. They are indeed our masters. And I think this is a very pertinent amendment from Councillor Kiat in particular. And I think all the others also move us in the direction of a more responsive council, which is what we actually want, I hope, as a collective. None of these actually prioritise any view over another. We all, at times, I'm sure, and I can speak for myself, have heard things I am in significant disagreement from the gallery, but that's okay, because ultimately we have to hear from the community we are here to represent. And I don't think we suffer from it. And I think that's the important thing, that we actually do listen and we do hear from people. And I think these kind of restrictions make local government less responsive. And I think in the situation where we have an amalgamated council, and we'll talk about that later on, I know, already the vibe I'm getting very strongly from my community, our community, is that people feel cut out of the process. And I think what is on the agenda here with this is moving us back. So I think both the amendments from Councillor Porteous and Councillor Kiat move us in a more progressive direction, and that is the history of our precursor councils, and I'd ask all councillors to support it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll come back. Thank you for that. I'll come back to the officers. So if we could just talk through and display on the screen the 4 items that Councillor Kiat is referring to in his amendment.
Through the chair, so clause 4.3, Councillor Kiat amendment is to remove clause 4.3, which has a limit on the number of items a person may register to speak on.
Yep.
Clause 4.11 is, the amendment is to remove the words that the time limit is to be strictly enforced by the chairperson, just noting that they're the words from the Office of Local Government in their model code. The last amendment is clause 8.1, which is the order of business. Councillor Kiat amendment is to insert items of business after items of business, by exception, items of business addressed during the public forum as a separate item.
Thank you for that. I'll just speak very briefly against the amendments. I think the first amendment could be referred to as the Lozano amendment. There's only one person that I'm aware of who's ever registered to speak to more than 3 items at a council meeting, and that's a former candidate for public office who did it at every consecutive meeting for about a year. Let me put it this way. Once I've stepped down from council or been defeated at an election, if anyone here catches me registering for more than 3 council items to come up and speak to, please take me out and shoot me. I don't believe there is any impact on any resident other than maybe Mr. Lozano in limiting.
Point of order.
Point of order, Chair.
Mayor, you've just said you'd want to be taken out of a shot, and you're talking about Mr. Lozano.
Point of order, Chair. Raising a resident's name in this situation, I think, is inappropriate, and
really do believe, thank you, Chair, I believe that's fair.
There is no impact, there's 200,000 people in the West. There is no impact on 199,000 of 999 of the number of items. Raise your hand if you're not a member of the party and you have less than more than
Chair, this is also entirely democratic. You are once again in breach of the not requiring the event on the obviously resulting in running off that on the basis in the last public forum, I initially but anything that was not looked at actually calculates how much is being when we separate out on the use of the very stark result. That is the basic when politicians know that on the category can't play with the matter of value. But all politicians can be making a lot more. So if the pragmatic objective is to make sure that everybody puts their campaign sooner and work out the outcome, then it's very clear that it's not going to generate the outcome. From the local government.
On the notion of coming up to this meeting and expressing a view, I think places far too much weight on that particular aspect. I think it's important. We should have the forum, and then we should get on with the business with paper as printed. I don't think we should take a backward step. I think we need to continue to work to improve the way we make decisions here, to get those decisions made in the best interest of our community. And I believe this CODA meeting practice does that, and I urge all councillors to support it.
Thank you for that. I'll now put that, so we've got the amendments from Councillor Kiat, which I failed to ask for a seconder for. I presume there is one. Seconded by Councillor Hesse. They can be dealt with en bloc, I presume. And then we've got the amendment from Councillor Porteous to remove the public forum and replace with the existing provisions regarding registered speakers and add the following items which people are registered to speak are brought forward and dealt with before other items on the agenda. Is that distinct from the third of Councillor Kiat's amendments?
Can I just have some clarification? We do that anyway. If somebody has children here or needs to leave, all they have to do is raise the issue, and 100% of the time, we comply.
I can confirm that, that's true.
So I don't think that we have to have this is what I'm saying.
No, I understand, Councillor. Okay, I'm happy just to deal with the amendments. Is there a seconder for the Porteous amendment? Seconded by Councillor Steer. So we'll deal with the Kiat amendments, then the Porteous amendment. If they're successful, they'll be incorporated into the primary motion. I'll put the Kiat Hesse amendments. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'll use my casting vote to defeat those. They have been defeated. The Porteous Steer amendment, I'll put that. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That has also been defeated. I'll now put the primary motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'll use my casting vote to carry that. That motion has been adopted. Next item, item 7, Councillor York.
Yes, Mr Mayor, there's something about
Councillor
this,
Porteous as well, eh? I'll hit my hand up.
can you tell me why the items by ward, the only ward names are the Indigenous names? I would like to know how many residents, when they read these Indigenous names, know what ward they're talking about and know what they're reading. If you're going to use the Indigenous names, use the ward names that the Electoral Commission knows about. Not just what this council feel good using Indigenous names, which, by the way, none of you people would know an Indigenous person, but you're all bending over backwards for them.
Councillor, do you want to pose that as a question to the officers?
I want to pose that as a complaint. Who comes up with these ideas?
I'll put that question to the group manager.
Mayor, I understand some time ago there was a request that we separate indicate which wards the various items in the business paper were related to on the front of the reports.
Yes, but the question is in relation to why the conjoined name is not used and instead only the Aboriginal name.
Councillor, it was an attempt to make the process a little simpler. If you want the ward names back in there, we'll put them back in.
Thank you,
Thank you for that.
Mr Deegan. I think it makes it easier for the residents.
Councillor York.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak briefly on item 10 that the General Manager just flagged, which is the Fitzroy Lane matter in Newtown, Damon Ward, that we had someone speak to last time.
Yes.
I'd like to move a brief amendment to that, to the officer's recommendation, which is, or to the Traffic Committee's recommendation, which is simply that Traffic Committee review that decision in 6 months' time. I'm not sure other councillors are aware of the situation in Fitzroy Lane, but essentially it's a very narrow lane that runs off Australia Street in Newtown. There's room for parking along one side only. There's been some confusion over time about which side of the lane parking ought to be on. Council initiated a consultation process some months back suggesting parking on one side of the lane, and then partway through that process changed the proposal to the other side of the lane. As you can imagine, there are residents on both sides of the lane and both sides, therefore, of the argument. I'm not sure there's a simple solution to the matter, but given the confusion that's arisen, I would like to see that decision reviewed by Traffic Committee in a period of 6 months.
Okay, so Councillor York is moving an amendment to that item. Councillors, further discussion?
Yes, I just have one more thing to raise.
Okay, well, that was an extended question that you posed before then. I thought you'd already spoken.
No, that was, I wanted to clarify.
Okay. Yes?
I would ask councillors to have a look at item 27, the right people on the traffic committee. I would also like councillors to see the RMS representatives reply to the question that was put to the traffic committee.
There's no RMS representatives here.
Well, if you'd like, just to,
Yep.
Councillor de Cruz raised concerns regarding waiting time for pedestrians at the pedestrian crossing outside of Asheville Railway Station at intersection of Brown Street and Hercules Street. Well, the RMS representative said they wouldn't wait if they pressed the button. So I'm just trying to say, I'm glad that all these serious issues have been brought up at the traffic committee of pedestrians waiting at the lights, which they were told, press the button, the lights will change.
Thank you for that. I'd like to raise a question for the chair of the traffic committee, Councillor Macri. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
I have been,
Councillor
waiting.
Porteous.
Okay, thanks. I would also like to raise an amendment in relation to item 14, which is the no stopping signage, which is proposed to be installed in 3 nominated locations in Eastern and Folkart Street in Rozelle. And we did have some residents who spoke to us on this particular item.
Yep.
Obviously, as with quite a number of streets in Rozelle and Balmain, the parking is at a premium, and the streets themselves are actually very well managed by local residents. They're largely used by local residents. There is a 40k right across the peninsula, so you can't exceed 40k anywhere on the peninsula. The investigation of the no stopping has not been triggered by an accident or even a risk of an accident. It seems to have been triggered by somebody thinking that perhaps it wasn't safe and therefore it needed the no stopping. But I think it in fact is being managed very well by the local residents, and in recognition of that, as is the case with a number of different locations, certainly in Balmain and Rozelle, and I believe also in other parts in Lilyfield and Leichhardt and Birch Grove and Newtown. We are just living in an inner city location. We're always going to have parking at a premium. The residents are well aware of the safety issues, and they manage those safety issues very well locally. So I'd like to move, and I have sent the wording to the minute taker, that basically we don't install the stopping. I'll just read the exact wording out. It doesn't matter, okay. That in relation to item 14 LTC 0319, the no stopping signage not be installed in the 3 nominated location on Eastern and Folkart Street, Rozelle. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm happy to second that amendment. That was the issue I was seeking to raise with Councillor Macri. Further discussion, councillors? There being no further discussion, do we have Councillor York, were you moving adoption of the minutes when you moved your amendment? Presume so. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Passis. Councillor York, you willing to incorporate the Porteous-Byrne amendment for deletion of the no stopping signs? That's incorporated. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Now, item 7, Residents Association Small Grants Program. Councillors, very small amount of money for council to endorse. Councillor De Cruz, then Councillor Passis.
I think I remember putting this in last fortnight, so
It's a peace group.
very non-pecuniary interest.
Councillor Hesse declared an interest at the last meeting as a member of Marrickville Peace Group, I believe, and he's now absented himself. Councillor De Cruz.
Could I ask a question, because I'm a little bit concerned that this this grant was specifically set up for non-incorporated resident groups, and while I have no problem with the two groups who've applied and have been selected to receive a grant, they're not really the groups that the grant system was set up for. Could you comment? Yeah, could you comment on what happened? Because there are particular residents groups who haven't even applied.
I'll put that question to the Deputy General Manager.
They used to be residents groups.
Yes, through the chair. There was only a very small number of residents groups that actually applied for this, and I'll have to check whether in terms of the criteria, whether it made a difference, but there was only two groups that actually met the criteria.
No, the point, sorry, the point is that this was specifically set up for unincorporated groups. So in fact, neither of these groups meet that requirement. So this was, the idea was that residents groups wouldn't need to be incorporated to get this grant. It was specifically set up for that category of group.
Councillor, are you arguing against the money being issued?
I'm concerned that the particular groups who this money was intended for
Didn't apply
haven't
for it.
applied.
Yeah, well, I don't think the officers have any control over that.
Well, then the grant doesn't actually meet the intended purpose.
Yes, good reason to do away with it. Councillor Passos.
Well, I'm voting against this. First of all, the Haberfield Association have been getting money from this council for since the inception. And we still don't know how many members they have, what they do and where they are. And the Peace Group, I think they've received funding previously, and we've got here that the 3 ineligible applicants be advised. I really do believe the report should show who they were. And we really should know who they were. And I am sick and tired of every person, 2 or 3 people that decide they want a group, come cap in hand and ask this council for money. If you're on some group or some committee or action group, whatever, if you believe in what you're fighting for, go out and raise your own money. Because this is ratepayers' money, ratepayers in the whole of the municipality. They might want to support that group. They might be in direct contrast with what that group stands for. I'm just sick and tired of the same people over and over again coming here asking for ratepayers' money. Go out and run a raffle.
Okay.
And if you're not good enough to pay for your own flyers, disband the group.
Thank you for that. I'll speak very briefly to the matter, but I'd like to ask 2 questions of the officers first. Can we get clarification about the 3 ineligible applicants, what the reason was for their ineligibility and who they were?
Through the chair, I'll have to take that on notice, but I can provide that information to councillors.
Okay, no problem. Can I also get some idea from officers, perhaps just a guesstimate, about the amount of staff time or resources that's spent on the administration of this program?
Exactly.
Through the chair, I've taken that notice, but it's significantly more than $920.
Right. Okay, well, councillors, you recall we had quite a heated discussion here previously about whether the precinct committee system that existed under Leichhardt Council would be funded and expanded across the entire Inner West LGA, and there was a resolution of the council not to do that.
Surprise.
And there was a report from council officers which suggested that we trial a small grants program in order to see whether that is something that that those resident groups might wish to take up, which they have not done. So I'm happy to support adoption of the officer's recommendation in this instance, but I note that the purpose of this program was not to provide a new ancillary funding for the Haberfield Association or the Marrickville Peace Group. It was to test whether the precincts which existed under Leichhardt Council could operate under their own auspice and to provide some funding that they could apply for meetings and so on. And that hasn't occurred. And given the advice from council officers that we're incurring a much larger cost to ratepayers through the administration of the program, I think it would be wise in the future for us to consider whether it needs to continue. Councillors, further discussion. Councillor Porteous.
Yes, look, I guess what this really points to, I mean, I think there's value definitely in the grants that have been allocated to proceed with those grants. Obviously, the council staff have, has been rightly pointed out, they have put in good hours to come to this recommendation. It's a carefully considered recommendation, and it certainly would not be recommended to council if it was not going to be of benefit to the wider community. So I think we should certainly proceed with those. Having said that, I think Councillor De Cruz has also raised a really critical point is in that what we are seeking to also do is to reinvigorate the local, reinvigorate the neighbourhood, reinvigorate a way of ensuring that there are local groups that are representing the different areas of the council, and particularly so because we have such a large council area now. So it's increasingly difficult for all of the councillors to be across all of the areas all of the time. And one of the great values that local groups, precincts, committees, call them what you will, have always provided is that understanding of what's going on in different areas, so that we can get a handle on what are the really critical issues that we should be addressing and prioritising. So I think that putting the politics of precinct committees aside, there is still a lot of value in us pursuing the precinct committee framework to try and get a council. Because to be quite honest, I mean, they are a way for us. They're also, I think, a really effective consultative mechanism for us. They can serve a whole lot of different really valuable roles for council, and even more so for a large council like this. So I do think that if there's a lesson, a learning to come out of this process, is that we do need to spend some more time on how we get precinct committees, or something equivalent to precinct committees, up and running again. So I'd like to propose that that we adopt the recommendations of this, and that also, in addition, that a report be brought back to council on how best to develop and reinvigorate precinct committees for the Inner West Council, and the report to include the resources, staffing resources, and any financial implications. So I'll move that way.
Get some advice. We've certainly specifically resolved not to do that previously, so I'll get some advice. I'll just provide notice to the officers that I'll be seeking their advice about whether that would require a rescission motion. Councillors, further discussion? Councillor Macri.
Chair, I'd like some advice on the points that Councillor De Cruz brought up about the eligibility of these groups under the criteria which the grants are supposed to be awarded. Couldn't I get an answer from the staff through you?
Sorry, Councillor Macri, could you repeat the question?
I just want to get some clarification from the staff on the issue that Councillor De Cruz brought up about the eligibility of these groups under the criteria that the grants are set up. Are they eligible to actually get the money? Because Councillor De Cruz, as she said, doesn't believe they're eligible. Is that the case?
Well, that question's been taken on notice by the Deputy General Manager.
Then I don't think we can make any decision on this. I think you best defer the matter. I think there's another matter pending with this sort of thing already.
Okay, so we've got Councillor Macri, we've got Councillor Porteous moving a primary motion for adoption of the grants, but also to look at re-establishing precinct committees, which you would like wording to the minute taken form. Councillor Macri, based on the advice from council officers that we can't confirm that the grant recipients recommended are eligible, is moving deferral of the matter. Is there a seconder for the primary motion from Councillor Porteous?
I did just adopt the recommendation. Yes.
She's also moved that we re-establish precinct committees. Seconded by Councillor Lockie. Is there a seconder for the Macri motion?
Here it is.
The foreshadow motion, seconded by Councillor Passos. Councillors, further discussion? Now, I've got advice from I've got advice from Mr. Naylor, which I'll ask him to make available to all councillors, about the whether a rescission motion is required for the component of Councillor Porteous's resolution, which would see us seeking to re-establish precinct committees.
Through the chair, this matter's been discussed previously by council, and council decided not to reinvigorate the precinct committees. He'd need to rescind that previous resolution before putting up an amendment for a further report to reinvigorate them.
Okay, so I'm going to have to move that component of Councillor Porteous's resolution out of order. So her resolution now becomes the officer's recommendation for adoption of the for endorsement of the grants. I must say, having discovered tonight that we're not able to confirm that there that the grant recipients are eligible to receive the money, that I'm inclined to support Councillor Macary's motion for deferral to err on the side of prudence. Is there any further discussion? If not, I'll go to Councillor Porteous for her right of reply. Councillor Stamalos.
Mr Mayor, I don't think we've really thought through the scope of the Resident Association small grants. I think that's one of the problems with the number of applications we received and also with the number of applications recommended. If it was supposed to be in any way some sort of parallel to what we had with the old precincts, in particular in Leichhardt, we funded those in order of about $30,000 over the course of a year. Well, here we have a quarter of that budget spread over 3 council areas. So I don't know what we're trying to achieve with that minuscule amount of money, $7,500. So I think both council and our community don't really understand what the purpose of these grants are, and certainly the level of funding that's attributed to this program is so small that I don't think we understand it at all. So maybe we need to review this whole program as part of your deferral. So I'll be supporting the deferral tonight, but I think we probably need to review the purpose and what we hope to achieve out of these as well. So can I put that forward as an amendment that council undertakes that review and a report comes back? Thank you.
So Councillor Macri, Councillor Stamalos is moving to amend your deferral to actually turn it into a motion that would see the precinct committees come back through a review. I think that's actually a foreshadowed motion, but I'll ask him to provide the wording to the minute taker so that Councillor Macri can consider it. Well, he'll have to speak for himself because I'll put it to you once you've received the wording. Further discussion, councillors?
Could I, just a clarification through the chair, if I could?
Yes.
I'm a little bit unclear as to why, where in the report itself it says the eligible applicants recommended for funding are. Look, I recognise the fact that it's authorised by Lara Stevens, the group manager, who I know is on extended leave currently. So I'm not sure if we have the correct officer here available to provide that, but it clearly states in the report that these are eligible applicants. So I'm not clear as to why there's been a decision suddenly that they're not eligible, unless we're saying that the council officer has written an incorrect report. But maybe I could get a clarification.
I'm confused as
on
well.
that.
I'm told now by the Deputy General Manager that he is able to clarify that matter, so I'll put that to Mr Warburton.
Yes, through the chair. Look, the report clearly states that there were 5 eligible applicants for money, but only 2 met the criteria to be provided actual funding. The eligibility criteria are that applicants must be a not-for-profit resident association, but they don't have to be incorporated. They have to relate to the resident association's offset of basic operational costs. They can't be used for capital works. They must be able to demonstrate that the residents association meets the objectives of being a resident association, must be accessible to all members, and they must have completed an evaluation report and acquittal. So they have to show that they can acquit the funds. So the ones that weren't eligible couldn't meet that criteria. So you can't get a grant, say, for salary costs for staffing, capital works, political parties or activities.
Councillor De Cruz's question was whether incorporated organisations were prohibited from receiving the grant. Can we just get an answer to that?
No, they're not prohibited.
Right.
So just to clarify, these organisations that have been recommended for the funding are eligible. So in that case, I think the foreshadowed motion.
Okay, Councillor Mack, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Now, this is not really the fault of the councillors, but this is becoming a bit messy. Councillor De Cruz asked for clarification about whether incorporated organisations such as Marrickville Peace Group and the Haverfield Association were entitled to apply for this grant. The answer was ambiguous. Excuse me. At which point, Councillor Macri said, "Well, if we don't have a clear answer on that, we can't do something improper. Let's defer the matter." We've now got clarification from the council officers that they are eligible for the grants. So, Councillor Macri, I'll pose a question to you about whether you wish to withdraw your motion for deferral.
Where does
happy if.
No, I'll call the meeting to order. I'll
was
call
just-
I'll call the meeting to order. I'll ask the Deputy General Manager to confirm once more where in the council policy it identifies these organisations as being eligible for the grant.
Yes, through the chair. So there were 5 applications, all of which were eligible to apply, but when their criteria were applied to their 3 applicants, they were deemed that they did not meet the full criteria, and so only 2 applicants were given grants or have been recommended for giving grants under the criteria as advertised.
Okay, so Councillor Macri has withdrawn his foreshadowed motion. So we've got a primary motion from Councillor Porteous, which is simply the officer's recommendation to adopt the grants. We've got an amendment from Councillor Stamoulis that council undertake a review of the small grants program, its scope and purpose, with a report to come back in May 2019. Is there a seconder for that amendment?
I'm happy to incorporate that amendment. Could I just check through the chair that May 2019 is reasonable for the staff in terms of them being able to do the report within that time frame?
I'll put that question to the Deputy General Manager.
No.
Could you indicate what is a reasonable time frame to be able to do that report?
I'll put that question to the officer.
Through the chair, a review of this nature would probably give 3 months, so I'd say May, June, July, August, around August.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Porteous, do you wish to incorporate the amendment?
Okay, so if we could change the date until August 2019 so that it works for the
Okay,
staff.
in that case, I will move the officer's recommendation as a foreshadowed motion, and I wish to speak to that briefly and against the amendment which has now been incorporated into the primary motion. It's quite clear that there's more council resources being spent on the administration of this program than there is community benefit in the grants that are being distributed. Significantly more. And the answer to that is not to require even more staff time to be dedicated to doing a review into a program that's distributed a total of 2 grants to 2 organisations for a piddling amount. This is Monty Python-esque. So I'm happy to support the grants being issued, not happy to support officers' time being completely and utterly wasted reviewing a program as a backdoor method to re-establishing precinct committees at this council, and I will move a foreshadowed motion as such.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. No one's talking about precinct committees. We're reviewing these grants, this program, to make it either better or to make some determination.
Councillor Porteous, your right of reply.
I just very, very quickly, I mean, obviously...
I'll just check firstly, is there seconder for the foreshadowed motion? There being no seconder for the foreshadowed motion, it will lapse.
Okay.
There's a seconder for that, is there? Sorry, is there? Yes, Councillor Drury. Excellent. Okay, Councillor Porteous.
Okay. I think you chewed up some of my time, but no worries. Look, I think the Mayor has misinterpreted the intention of the amendment, which I was happy to incorporate into the primary motion. I think what all of this being proposed here is a review. I would expect that that review should be relatively straightforward, but it should, I think it's something that would be very valuable actually to workshop with the councillors as well as to what we want to achieve with the small grants program, so that we are using that money in the best way possible to get the best outcome for the community. So I see it as a very positive thing to be able to do that, and we're in a forcibly amalgamated council. We have to keep working on trying to make processes better. While, you know, this is a huge challenge, and unfortunately we've lost so many levels of democracy and so many voices in our community. We have to find ways of trying to reinstate them, and one of the processes that was proposed was this small grants program. I think it's fair to say that the organisations that did make application were perhaps not the ones that we expected. Very good organisations nevertheless, and definitely worthwhile supporting them for grants, but we did want to reach out further than that. For some reason we haven't managed to. So I think we need to ask why that is and how we can ensure that it has got a greater reach, and it's also getting to those resident associations, because essentially that's what it's called, Residents Association Small Grants Program. But it needs to be reaching further than it currently is. So I would urge councillors to not vote en bloc, just because the mayor's voting one way, they vote the same way, but actually to vote for what is best for the community. And I think that my motion with Councillor Stamoulos' amendment is actually the one which is
Call the meeting to order.
which is the motion which is going to achieve the best outcome for the community. Thank you.
I'll put the Porteous-Lockie motion. If that's defeated, we'll deal with the Byrne-Drury motion. All those in favour of the Porteous-Lockie motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That has been defeated. We now got the foreshadowed motion from myself and Councillor Drury, which is just for adoption of the officer's recommendation for the grants to be issued. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All those against? That has been carried with Councillors Rossetti, Passos and Macri against. Next item, investment report.
Mayor,
Item
can I
8.
move the investment report be received and noted? And note once again, significant pleasure of the steps that we are taking in socially responsible investments and non-fossil fuel standards.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor McKenna? Councillor McKenna? Right. Further, any discussion, councillors? There been Councillor Stamoulos?
Mr Mayor, I didn't find the economic and investment portfolio commentary very helpful at all. And I'm wondering whether or not we can sort of adjust that slightly to focus more on the interest rate markets and in particular those indicators that might be more compatible with our understanding of those. I appreciate that it's nice to understand what's happening with various components of CPI and house prices and what might be happening in Japan and Europe, but I would be more interested in understanding what's happening within the Aussie interest markets, a little bit international, and also those other indices that might sort of impact more on where our progress might be and how we're in fact performing against those.
I'll put that as a request to the Chief Financial Officer. Do you wish to comment on that, or will you take that on notice?
I'll take that on notice.
Okay, thank you for that. There being no further discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item, item 9, notice of motion, review of aquatic centre times. Councillor De Cruz.
Thank you. So basically this notice of motion arose out of the request by the Water Polo Association to extend the swimming pool times at LPAC. And I think it actually came to light that the swimming pool closes at 8 o'clock at night and the gym at 9. That's actually really quite early. People get home from work much later than that, and I think that there may be an opportunity to review. It might be a good time to review the times that the swimming pools are open and perhaps extend it. So that's simply the notice of motion for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Passos.
What would be the costings in this? Weren't we told that we can't put anything up unless we've got costings?
Are you going to pose that as a question to Councillor De Cruz?
Not to Councillor De Cruz. I'm posing it to
Yep.
the people that tell us that we've got to find the funding when we put these motions up. So this is going to cost us some way. So why is there no funding source there?
Okay, I think I might be able to address this through an amendment that I'm going to propose, which I've provided to the minute takers.
And I'm not finished yet.
Yes?
How many votes do you think are in the polo players for you people to all try and grab half a dozen of them? We've got the mayor, we've got this, we've got that. Because we're all bending over backwards for polo players.
I can't see it.
Let's waive fees for them here. Let's waive fees for them there. Asheville residents paying for it. We're so interested in the polo players. The Asheville residents are paying the highest rates for a pool that's going to end up $60 million. And we've had to put a polo pool in it for the players. Forget all the rest of the residents. I'm up to here with this. Absolutely up to here.
Okay, councillors, I procured the same advice that I presume Councillor De Cruz did in drafting this motion, which is the review that she's asking for will already be undertaken by staff as a result of the review of aquatic centres, which is already underway. So it doesn't require an extra report, doesn't require a resolution of the council. I found Councillor De Cruz's motion somewhat confusing as well because it was unclear whether it was proposing an extension or a shortening of the hours, which would obviously determine whether there was a cost implication. But I'll just ask for clarification through the Deputy General Manager about whether this work will already be undertaken and reported to councillors.
Yes, through the Chair. The report is actually being already underway, and it's relatively straightforward to gather this data because we have a lot of data about entries and so forth.
Thank you for that.
Could I just clarify? What I was seeking was a review.
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor De Cruz
Was a review of the hours of swimming pools were open and available to the public, given that it's getting warm. I did actually discuss this with the staff quite extensively, and they said that they could do it within their existing budget. I think it's an oversight that has not been included in the motion. I don't know, that's on the papers why that's happened. But it's actually not for water polo. I mean, the point is that the pool has to be open.
To order. You've already spoken to the item. So if you're able to incorporate noting that the review is already being undertaken, then I think it can just be supported unanimously. Okay, well, I'll be the seconder of it then. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried unanimously. Next item. Sorry, I've just waylaid my papers. Where are we up to? Item 10, Westconnex, satellite imaging. Just before I go to Councillor Lockie, ask for clarification or confirmation from the CEO about what approach has been made by the agency referred to in the motion to council and whether that has been progressed.
Thank you, councillors. I've written to the Roads and Maritime Service as it was then, now incorporated into Transport for New South Wales, recommending that they consider this technology and apply it to the Westconnex residents as a matter of priority. And I've asked that response be provided perhaps more quickly than normally. In my review of the technology, it seems to be first class and at the cutting edge, and I think would make a significant difference to the consideration of the dilapidation risk that people may well be at.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Lockie?
Yeah, that's great to hear, and I know residents will be really pleased to hear that. This is a fairly straightforward motion. It is seeking to do what it sounds like we are already underway with, which is to support and advocate on behalf of our residents who have either experienced property damage as a result of the Westconnex construction or who will be at risk of it with the construction of the stage 3 and future stages in particular. As is outlined in the report, I've brought this to council in light of the satellite images that were released that show what actual ground movements happening underneath properties to a very, very fine degree. The reason that's significant is because up until this point, a lot of residents have experienced, in some cases, quite severe damage. I think the worst case that I'm personally aware of is a resident who is looking at multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to repair her home, as is her neighbour. But the issue they're having is in terms of proving causality in regards to definitively being able to say that Westconnex surface construction or tunnelling near their properties is what has actually caused the damage to be incurred to their properties. So this satellite imagery, because it actually shows not just the extent of damage but also the timing at which it took place, that this could really help people with their legal cases, and I think we should be doing what we can to advocate.
Does anyone wish to amend the motion or speak against it? Councillor Hesse has indicated he'll second the motion. Councillor Passos? Yes?
We've just had a state election. And I want to know, and by the way, as you know, 4 more years. 4 more years the Liberals got. The horrible people that are building the Westconnex. They got 4 more years. Where were these people prior to the election? I would like to see reports, builders' reports telling us about all this damage. That's what I would like to see. I can't see anybody up here in the gallery showing me with their builder all this damage that's happened to their properties and letters from Westconnex, people saying they're not paying. Off the top of my head, because I'm not that interested, I'd love to know how much Westconnex has cost. Billions, I've heard. Are you trying to tell me that the government would renege on paying for property damage? Yes. With all the millions they've... No, the government's not stupid. It's not paying for damage you already had. They're not stupid. They're accountable with taxpayers' money. But please don't tell me that they would not pay if they were liable. Because I have not come across one person yet in the Ashville-Haberfield area that is not satisfied with how Westconnex has treated them. There's been dilapidation reports. You can laugh as much as you like. 4 more years they got. 4 more years. So they're doing something right. As far as state governments go, they'd be one of the honest state governments in this whole country and the most accountable. So I don't know what you people are going to do when Westconnex is finalised. What are you going to run on at the next council election? You won't have something to whinge about. You better find something. I am sick and tired of this whole council, all the hours, the resources and the money that we have spent just so you people can get elected on Westconnex. But I got elected and I was all for Westconnex. So it goes to show not everybody is upset about it. Very selfish people in the inner west, they can walk to work. But don't worry about the people out west. How long it takes them to get to work and how much it costs them. Very selfish people.
People out west aren't happy with it either.
Councillor Hesse.
Thanks, Chair. It's very sad to hear what Councillor Passes has had to say, because I can assure her the residents of St Peters...
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Hesse has the floor.
I can assure her that the residents of St Peters, Haberfield and areas affected by Westconnex are indeed very sick and tired of the fact that the serious issues and damage that have been done to their properties has not been addressed by this government. It's very, very clear that in the inner west, the Liberal government did not get too many votes. In fact, people voted very strongly for the Greens and for Labor. Winning is also not, should not blind us to the fact that that governments should be responsible to the whole community, not just those bits of it that we like. It's beholden on us as elected representatives in this council to stand up for our community, including those people and groups that we don't like necessarily. It's beholden on us to do the right thing, and that's what this report asks for, and I thank Councillor Lockie very much for putting it forward. And I've got to say, I thank too the new CEO, Michael Deegan, for being so quick off the mark and supporting the community by taking the action that he's taken, reported it here tonight. I think that's a good sign for our community that we are indeed becoming a well-led council and that we are responsive to the community that we represent. I think the government, re-elected as it is, although on a significantly lower vote and significantly less seats, need to be aware that this community and the whole community of Sydney should be looked after. Doing things on the cheap, not looking after the community is not acceptable, and it may upset, while some councillors may not wish to see what's in front of them, and indeed some residents may not talk to some of those councillors because they don't believe they'll be represented, the rest of us know exactly what's going on and it's not good. I ask all councillors to support this motion. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councillor Porteous.
Yes, look, I'd also like to thank Councillor Lockie for bringing forward this item, which this is a very important motion, and it's good to hear that the Inner West Council and our new CEO is acting proactively on this issue. I want to move some further amendments. I'd ask that we vote separately on these amendments because I want to make sure that they enjoy the support of the council, at least the majority of council. But I do think that we could do some more, particularly now we have a new government. So just to add, I've just sent that through to the minute taker, Ian, the latest one. No, not that one. The latest one. That's the wrong one. Yep, I've just sent it to Ian like 5 minutes ago.
Okay, well, we'll take that on
okay.
notice if you'd like to
Sorry.
speak to it, and I'm sure they'll be
Okay,
able to
so amendments are to add a point 5 that council writes to the Premier of New South Wales calling on New South Wales Government to ensure the area impacted by ground movement known as the zone of influence is extended from the current 50 metres to 300 metres across the built and planned Westconnex route, and all property owners within this catchment are made eligible for free pre and post construction property dilapidation reports. I think this is really critical now that we've got this evidence in front of us. We can no longer condone that 50 metres is in any way going to be a sufficient zone. We can see that the impact is much wider, and those people before those impacts start, they actually need to have those pre-dilapidation reports done so that they can adequately measure, particularly internally to their buildings, what damage is going to happen post-construction. So I think we need to be moving in that way now. So I'd ask that we write to the Premier about that. Also that we write to the Premier regarding 4A and 4B, which is just defining that, in fact, we would also be writing to the Premier on those items. And then also that we, the Mayor on behalf of Council, writes to the Minister for Planning seeking a response regarding the numerous breaches of the environmental impact statements for the Westconnex, where the environmental impact statements state the ground movements of 1 to 20 millimetres are usual within the settlement criteria, but in actual fact, what we're seeing is movements far in excess of that, between 50 and 16, sometimes up to 100 millimetres. Noting, therefore, that the premises on which these EISs have been developed are wrong, and therefore they may be in breach of the conditions of consent for these projects. And that finally, that the Mayor and interested councillors also seek a meeting with the Minister for Planning to pursue this matter further, because I think there are real issues there about on what basis was the EIS developed and the approval granted, when clearly we can see now that these movements are way in excess of that, and that needs to be addressed. So I think, again, to get on the front foot as a council, these would be good proactive actions for us to take. Thanks.
Not sure that there's any need to vote on those matters separately. I'm certainly happy to vote on them if they're incorporated, support them if they're incorporated into the primary motion. Councillor Lockie, do you wish to vote on them separately, or can you incorporate them?
If there's a majority of councillors who are happy to vote them together, then I'm happy to do that.
One minor suggestion, in the reference in amendment in point 7A, amendment 7A to 100 millimetres, I'd suggest we add the words or greater subsequent to that. So all of that's incorporated into the primary motion. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the primary motion? If not, I'll go to Councillor Lockie for her right of reply.
Can I speak?
Are you moving an amendment or speaking against it? Amendment, yes.
Now, thank you, Councillor Lockie, for putting this motion forward. I think it's wonderful that we're starting to adopt science now in diagnostics and understanding of the world around us, rather than 50-metre rules, very, very blunt instruments and best guesses. I think there's particular relevance for council to also enter into further discussions about the use of satellite imagery across all the government agencies as well. So certainly, in respect of this discussion here, very, very important that we use the satellite imagery to assist in understanding risk and assisting our residents. But that discussion, I think, should also be wider, because there's a lot of environmental projects that would certainly benefit from the use of satellite imagery. A lot of other projects that occur within our area, across Sydney, across New South Wales. So I'm going to propose the amendment that council also encourage state government to use satellite imagery as part of its understanding of environmental impacts on a full range of projects across all government relevant agencies.
I assume that's incorporated as well, Councillor Lockie? I'll go back to you for your right of reply.
Yeah, look, I don't know quite what to do with some of those comments. Look, I think you'd have to be living under a bit of a rock to not actually be aware that there are people experiencing. Have reports that link the damage to the timing of the Westconnex construction, and that their requests for compensation are being denied. It's been widely reported in the media, widely reported to MPs across the area, as well as to many of us here on council, and I do believe we've had at least one resident from the Haberfield-Ashfield area come to speak to council on exactly this issue in relation to his property. So I know there are many more people who are experiencing that kind of damage. Yeah, and look, I'm quite happy to accept those amendments, because I think we do need to be doing a lot more. And certainly in regards, because what we are actually seeing, and I have direct personal experience of this, is that even though the Westconnex project is legally obliged to compensate people for damage, just as it was legally obliged to compensate people fairly for properties acquired, that they are simply not doing that because they know they are bigger, they know they can wait out a legal battle with much more financial firepower, with all the time in the world that ordinary residents simply don't have. So that situation has got to change. It's got to change now, and I think we need to be doing, as a council, everything we can to support our residents in this.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, raise your hands. All those against? That has been carried. Next item is item 11. Notice of motion, Inner West Council Community Plebiscite on merger. Now, councillors, I'll note that I've been approached by two residents who've come along tonight, who I think are still in the gallery, who were unable to register to speak in time for the first time this was considered 2 weeks ago. And as is standard practice, I think, for most councillors in this chamber, I'd like to support their ability to be able to speak to the matter now. For the usual period of time. There's only two of them, I believe, Elizabeth and Lawson. So I'll move that we suspend standing orders to hear from the two residents who'd like to speak to the matter. Is there a seconder for that? I second it. Seconded by Councillor Passos. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Lawson and Elizabeth, do you want to come forward and let us know your views?
Yes, so thanks, Mayor Byrne. I'm Lawson Levy, a resident in Balmain. And amalgamations. I didn't think I'd expect to see amalgamations back. So the question of looking at those amalgamations at this stage, I would have thought that even Gladys Berejiklian would have felt this was right in our past. But, I mean, people do have different views, and a lot of people have a right to wish that they were dealing with small councils, councillors that they knew, and that did seem to work quite well in the old days. But I think the point that I would want to emphasise here is that in these days of high tech, of big IT, of heavy equipment, the most important thing is for our councils to get long-term efficiency and economies of scale. So I would like to say that we should not go back to where we were before, that we should continue with the amalgamation we have. It is probably well advanced in the councils at this point, and it would be a dreadful waste of money to go back to the older system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Elizabeth.
I'd just like to second what my husband said, but I'd also like to say I think that the responsibility of councillors on any council is to support the people they represent, our roads, our footpaths. We've got trees that are a nuisance in Balmain, and all our rates. I think council should be concentrating on removing trees because they are the roots come through and the footpaths are very dangerous around Balmain. And I think we should be concentrating on those sorts of things. And our rate, I'd like to know where all our rates go now that we are amalgamated. I think the councils who represent us should actually be rather more transparent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Neither of you used your allotted 3 minutes. That's excellent, very succinct. Councillor Stamoulis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The ongoing deep concern with council amalgamations continues. State candidates recently raised it as a priority concern. Today, no party has said that they will take mergers forward as part of their policy program. As we know, state government turned its back on this policy, but the Inner West, however, keeps it going. We might want to ask why. Councillors know how much the merger is costing. We know the huge amount of staff resources going into it, which should be used on other things. We know of the many problems with the merger, yet like a big government bureaucracy, fed by ratepayers' funds and increased charges, we carry on without care. If we didn't have these funds to waste on the merger, it would have been stopped 2 years ago. Our merger was one of the very few in New South Wales. Even more so, it was one of the rare 3 council mergers. This made it very complex and expensive, creating an inefficient council. The cost of an inefficient council will be borne by ratepayers for decades ahead. The merger is having a massive impact on our budget position and our service delivery. Only 3 years in, and council are facing financial problems while our people are seeing little or no benefit. The merger is funded on an open cheque basis, and yet we seem not to be able to afford to hear the community voice. If we continue with this highly inefficient merger for decades ahead, the $1 million spent on a community plebiscite will be very little indeed. Even so,
I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Stamoulis has the floor. Councillor Stamoulis has the floor.
Thank you. Even so, council should seek full or part funding from state government for any costs. Some councillors talk about the cost of a plebiscite while taking no active interest or oversight of the merger costs or performance. The only report on merger costs was a paltry 2-page document 18 months ago. Merger costs are hidden from ratepayers and have little oversight by councillors. If ever there was a process that fails every audit, risk and fraud compliance process, the Inner West Council has certainly invented it. If a real, meaningful local government reform had taken place in 2016, we may have found a sensible merger. Instead, we got a political merger. What a weak foundation. Half of the councillors don't want it. Other councils look at us in disbelief. Most of our community doesn't want it, and a significant number of good staff have walked away from us. Our political merger weakens council's performance and it undermines our community and our local economy. Now is an opportunity for the new state government to review the merger. Our council should seek dialogue with state government rather than say that it's all too difficult. State government has been hurt by this policy. There is no value for them to be seen to support an inefficient, wasteful and problematic merger, and it certainly won't help them in any future attempts to pursue mergers. With only a 2-seat majority, the state Liberals have much community rebuilding to do. Here is a prime opportunity to do that. Our community see the merger as grossly expensive waste. Local representation is now much worse and council are finding it difficult to maintain service levels.
Councillor, your time has expired.
I'd like to make one last sentence if I could.
Please do.
As the only inner-city council that was merged, there is no doubt that our community would demerge if it were able to have its voice heard. Thank you.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Hesse. Do you wish to speak to it? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I think
Just get a clarification because up in front of us we've got a completely different motion to the motion that's on the papers. I'm not really clear if Councillor Stamoulis is now moving this completely different motion or if he's moving the one on the papers. Can we get a clarification from Councillor Stamos what we?
I revised it last week and it's submitted it.
Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
so-
Well, can I ask Councillor Stamos, and before I go to Councillor Hesse, to talk us through? I was presuming that we were dealing with the motion on the business papers.
Yeah, because I think it's completely different.
Yes, Councillor, do you want to explain to us how you've
Sure,
amended it?
most certainly.
Sorry, point of order.
Yes.
Point of order. Should be doing is dealing with the motion that's in the books.
Yeah.
If the
I
councillor...
understand the point of order, and
Good.
I'll make a ruling on it. Councillor Stamlis is able to amend his primary motion on the floor. He just failed to reference the fact that he was doing so at all in his speech, or identify what the amendments were, and I'm now asking him to do so.
So, certainly, yes. Councillors, that's an amendment to the motion.
What's the changes?
So the changes basically are saying that still we consider the plebiscite, which is the essential part of the motion, and I've simply added a sentence there to say that it could include a full demerger or an efficient restructure, that is a split of the council or whatever it might be, so we'll give the community some options there. We also may wish to put the question to the public about how they feel about the performance of the merger, that is in terms of service delivery. I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there thinking that they're not benefiting from this. Certainly a lot of comments coming back to councillors and me is suggesting that. We should also invite that dialogue, which I mentioned, which I referred to.
Mayor and Minister for Local Government are the new components.
Thank you.
Yes.
You can hire me sometime if you need me to explain your motions again.
Thank you.
Councillor Hesse. Okay. Councillor Passes.
Well, I'll be voting against this motion.
Councillor Passes was prior to that.
I've heard some comments here. Councillor Stamos has got every right. There was no funds. Nothing was done. We had 3 little branches of different political parties. That's how they were run. You cannot tell me that the amalgamation wouldn't work if you people had the fortitude for it to work. But you do not want the amalgamation to work. You do not want this council to address the problems that it has in the 3 municipalities. Every municipality has crumbling footpaths. Every municipality, you guys are putting up every week. We need toilets. We need this. We need fences. We need this drainage. We need these roads fixed. What did you do if you were such a good councils previously? Nothing. So don't tell me that it's causing, we're broke. We're catching up. We're catching up to how the councillors, the 3 previous councils, neglected their municipalities. Now, also, Mr. Councillor Stamola said that the last election, that the candidates were talking about that they were going to do it. They're going to fight for amalgamation if they get in. I have Labor's leaflets, no mention of de-amalgamating. I have Green leaflets, not a mention of de-amalgamating. But I think the Green candidate did say there's nothing wrong with having sex with animals. That's the only thing I remember that candidate
I'll call
said.
you to order, Councillor Passes.
So there was no mention of de-amalgamation. So I'm just saying here, anybody, any councillor that votes to spend this money on de-amalgamation is being very, very irresponsible with ratepayers' money. Because what we must do, if you really care about the municipality and you really care about the ratepayers, you would stop putting up motions, putting obstacles at this council's way. We will work together and we will be open, accountable and transparent to our residents. Oh, what's
Councillor
happening
McKenna.
tonight? Somebody likes me, thank God.
Councillor Byrne.
Hey!
Sorry, Councillor Porteous, then
Thank
Councillor
you.
McKenna.
Councillor McKenna, I think it's myself first.
Sorry.
It's all right.
What did you say?
Is it?
Councillor Porteous, then Councillor McKenna.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Look, I want to thank Councillor Stamoulos for bringing forward this motion, and I know it's been brought with the right wanting to put this on the table because it's something that actually does need to be addressed. Look, I am concerned, however, with the amended motion that Councillor Stamoulos has brought forward because I'm afraid it doesn't actually, in my opinion, go anywhere, and I'm a little bit disappointed that Councillor Stamoulos didn't perhaps share us with it earlier, so we might have been able to give him some feedback on it. And I do acknowledge the Liberal Labor cheer squad for the forced amalgamation. Nice to have you in the gallery tonight. But I also acknowledge that we have many people in the gallery tonight who do not think that this forced amalgamation is this stunning success, and that de-amalgamation needs to be something that's still addressed. So what I'm proposing is that we address the issue of de-amalgamation and find a way forward which properly acknowledges the fact that, in fact, a lot of people, and I include myself in those people, do not see this forced amalgamation as a great success, do not see it as something which has achieved better service, better outcomes for our community, and which is in fact continually creating a deficit situation. So I think that in terms of doing that, I'd like to move this as now what I'm going to propose is a foreshadowed motion. And that is first, if the minute taker could bring up my amendment, which I sent 2 weeks ago. After 3 years of amalgamation of 3 high-functioning councils, the amalgamation has placed enormous pressure on staff and systems, which has impacted on the quality of services delivered by council and has left the council with ongoing budget deficits. 1. 2, the council supports the right of councils in New South Wales to de-amalgamate, where the community demonstrates their preference for council to de-amalgamate. And we have voted that way in the local government conference as well. The council 3, write to the Premier requesting funding for the New South Wales Electoral Commission to run a plebiscite as to whether residents want to proceed with the amalgamated council or demerge and get their former councils back. The result of the referendum to be binding and reasonable costs of the demerge process to be met by the state government. They created it, they should pay for it. And 4, that the report be brought back to council on mechanisms currently available to council and the community to initiate a demerger process, including the use of a referendum and the use of community petitions under section 215 and 218A of the Local Government Act 1993, which enables a very easy process to trigger a de-amalgamation action similar to the amalgamation action. And I think that is giving proper acknowledgement to the de-amalgamation that we want to still pursue, and gives the community the right to have their say on that. And I think it's a better way forward, to be honest. Total acknowledgement for the well-intentioned motion of Councillor Stamoulos, but I just don't think it hits the buttons. So I would urge you to support my foreshadowed motion, which I think is actually more proactive and is more acknowledging of where we need to be at this moment in time. Thank you.
Okay, we've got a primary motion from Councillor Stamoulos, a foreshadowed motion from Councillor Porteous. I'll signal my intention to move a further foreshadowed motion, noting the costs of a plebiscite and the fact that it would not be binding, which is the previous resolution of council. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Mayor. We debated this issue not all that long ago, as I recall, with a notice of motion, I think from Councillor Porteous. There is no vehicle to demerge. It is blatantly not correct to actually encourage the community to think that there is a possibility of demerging. We've just had 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, the government elected for another 4 years, and the Premier has made it very clear that she is not going to support any demerge. We all would like to have the comfort of our past lives in the more simple environment of the small councils, but that is not possible. Can I just comment on the first paragraph of the report here? It is somewhat mischievous. It is not truthful. And I object to the comments that are made there in the last part of that first paragraph. My presentation to the delegate and the reports from all three councils prior to the merge, to the forced amalgamation, to the fit for the future requirements, clearly represented the position of the community. One thing, I've even just recently had a comment about my presentation to the delegate and how happy the community was with what I had to say. I clearly represented their intentions and their desires. Unfortunately, that is not what's written in this paper. The second thing that I would like to just comment on, we did not offer a merger to the government.
No.
We were given an ultimatum.
Yes.
We were forced to make a decision.
Yes.
There was no ability to not give an answer to the government.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Point of order.
Excuse me.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. That is a totally incorrect comment. No other inner city council was placed in that.
I'll adjourn the meeting if you can't refer to the code of meeting practice. You're in the constant practice of doing this. When you don't like a political point that someone's made, you move a point of order and tell them they're wrong.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't be a political point. It should be a real practical point.
Please desist the interjections. Councillor McKenna has the floor.
We did not offer a merger.
No.
We were given an ultimatum, and I'll just repeat it if you don't quite understand what I'm saying. We did our very best, the three councils, and for various reasons, which we haven't got time to go into in 3 minutes, we are in the position we're in. Unfortunately, for all of us, or for anyone who really would like to see us still in the former place, that's not the way we are. That's not what's going to happen. The Liberal government are not going to bend to what the Inner West councillors might think, and we will be continuing in this format for the time, for the future. If a Labor government had been elected, a plebiscite was going to be a possibility. It is not a possibility at this stage, and I'm not going to support anything that could cost the sort of money that we've been told.
Thank you for that. I wish to speak briefly against the resolution from Councillor Stamoulis. I concur with Councillor McKenna's comments about the inaccuracy of what's been asserted by Councillor Stamoulis in the background to his motion. I notice he didn't restate it in his speech tonight. It's completely inaccurate and fraudulent to suggest that the three councils submitted to a merger. And I know that Councillor Stamoulis has been on the ground in the ward that we share for the last 5 years telling everyone that I was the person who created the merger. Well, that resulted in you getting 17% of the primary vote and me getting 44% of the primary vote, Councillor Stamoulis. Can I say, what's becoming clear here is that there is a very large minority of councillors on this council who, instead of acting as a responsible board, want this council to fail. Want this council to fail. Got elected for the purpose of opposing the amalgamation, and then, if they couldn't have their way at the beginning of the council, running the council into the ground until a demerger occurred. That has been the strategy. That has been the strategy from at least 5, if not 7, of the councillors in this room tonight.
Point of order, Mayor.
Yes, Councillor. Yes, Councillor.
Look, I'd say that's probably borders on defamation, and I would ask you to withdraw that comment. You have absolutely no evidence of that, and that's bringing the council into disrepute and bringing those councils into disrepute. So I'd ask you to withdraw that comment.
I'll rule that it's not out of order, and I'll continue with my remarks. I have not had a single person in the last 6 months come up to me in the street and say, you know what I really want you to focus on? Demerging the council. Not a single person. And I talk to more people on the street than Councillor Stamoulis or anybody else in this chamber. I can tell you what they want us to fix. They want us to improve the DA system. Yes. They want us to make it easier for mums and dads to get a DA or an amendment to their home approved. They want us to deliver a few sporting fields, to deliver some artificial surfacing of sporting fields so that more kids can play sport. They want us to amend the tree DCP so that pensioners aren't having to beg and scrape when they need to remove a dangerous tree from their property. And they don't want their elected representatives turning up here every fortnight, carping and failing to put forward positive ideas. I don't believe that a demerger will be successful, and I do believe that we have to accept the reality. I didn't vote for the Liberals, but they were re-elected last weekend, and there was not a single skerrick of debate about de-amalgamation during the election campaign, and there's no indication from the government at all that they are going to agree to a demerger. So what is being proposed here once again is that we waste $1.3 million of ratepayers' money on a non-binding merger so that Councillor Stamlis can win a few votes at the next election. That's what's being proposed. And I say this, what I'm going to focus on, and what I hope everyone here will focus on, is trying to make the Inner West the best local government in Australia. Stop trying to destroy the joint, focus on trying to deliver for the community. Councillor Drury.
I never thought I'd clap for a Labor person.
Councillor Drury has the floor.
What a pathetic weasel word notice of motion.
I never thought I'd agree with you either.
That council consider a community plebiscite. Councillor Stamlis, why are you saying consider a community plebiscite rather than have a community plebiscite? I know why. Because if you said that we have it, then you'd have to identify where the $1.3 million would come to fund it. If you had the guts to do what you think you want to do, then you would have had to identify $1.3 million out of our budget for this. Now, your contribution in terms of budgetary discussion so far, I note, has been pretty minimal. Your interaction with the substance of the bulk of our budget has been a little bit of tinkering.
Point of order,
on the
Chair,
side.
if I might. I'm concerned that Councillor Drury is not addressing the topic but indulging in unreasonable caricatures of Councillor Stamlis, and I'd ask him to focus on the substance of the matter
I'll
rather
ask
than
Councillor
personal
Drury to
reflections.
remain relevant. Councillor Drury has the floor.
Excuse me, I have a point of order. Yes, he is. He's doing exactly what you people do.
Yes! Councillor Drury has the floor.
On your Facebook and everywhere else.
Point of order.
I'll call the meeting to order. I'll adjourn the meeting if necessary. Councillor Drury has the floor.
Mayor, I would ask that you ask Councillor Passos to desist when these constant comments, which
I've
are
asked Councillor
really
Passos and everybody else to desist. Councillor Drury has the floor.
I come back to my single point. My single point is this resolution goes to consider, think about a community plebiscite. It doesn't say have one. It doesn't say stump up the 1.3 mil. It doesn't say what we're not going to do if we do this. It says consider. Well, we asked the staff to come back to us and tell us it's going to cost 1.3. They've already told us that. If you really want this, be honest, be upfront and say, let's have a plebiscite. And you identify the 1.3 and where that's coming from.
Councillors, further discussion. Councillor Hesse, then Councillor Kiat.
Thank you, Chair. I speak in support of Councillor Porteous's, wherever it is in the system.
Could I request that the minute take actually come down so we can read vote?
Anyway,
Councillor Hesse has the floor.
her foreshadowed motion. The great thing about Councillor Porteous's foreshadowed motion is it doesn't commit this council to spending a cent. What it's doing is asking the state government to pay to unscramble the egg that it scrambled. Indeed, that's exactly right. The state government pay, not us. And that is the cogent and important thing to note here. And as part of that, after the state government have paid, that the residents of this area get to vote on what they should have got to vote on a couple of years ago, which is whether they wanted to be amalgamated in the first place. Now, it may amuse some people in this place to recall that in 1986, when I was a member of the Labor Party, I proposed at my local branch that we get rid, indeed, that we get rid of state governments. I was actually quite serious. Obviously, it didn't go well because Andrew F. Shorgy, and I quite like Andrew, said that he didn't want to vote himself out of a job, which I understand. He was a good bloke. He is a good bloke, thankfully. But I think the point is that when you look at what's been achieved by these kind of amalgamations, what we found is that the local government has less power and certainly not 1 cent more money to make our large local government area any better. So we're sort of stuck with the worst of both worlds. We're a bigger area, so where councillors are less connected, and with no disrespect to Mr Levy and Mrs Levy from Balmain, I'm not au fait with what happens in Balmain. I live in South Marrickville, and I'm familiar with what happens in Marrickville and Tempe and Sydenham and St Peters, not Balmain. And that's no offence, it's a lovely place. I know, I've been there a couple of times in my life. But I take that very seriously because I'm committed to making this place the best it can be. And I also want to recognise too Councillor McKenna, because I was at that meeting where she presented to the whatever he was, the secretary of the presentation, the delegate, thank you. And I know that Councillor McKenna spoke up very strongly for Ashfield, and I was deeply impressed. I think it's the first time I'd actually met Councillor McKenna. I know it was passionate and honest, and that's why I'd actually ask all councillors here to support Councillor Porteous's foreshadowed motion, because it actually puts it back to the state government. And it puts it back to the state government to right the wrong they committed on this area 3 years ago. I think we would all be happy to hear from our residents about what they think of it. Not what I think of it or anyone else around this table thinks of it, or what even people in the gallery tonight think of it, but what all the residents think of it. That's why I'd encourage you all to support Councillor Porteous's foreshadowed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, I'll just clarify where we're up to. We've got a primary motion from Councillor Stamoulis to consider a plebiscite. We've got a foreshadowed motion from Councillor Porteous that we write to the state government and ask them to pay for a plebiscite. We've got a further foreshadowed motion from myself. Now, we can't have 2 foreshadowed motions on the books at any one time, but I'm just flagging it. That Council simply note that a plebiscite would cost an estimated $1.1 to $1.3 million of ratepayers' money and would not be binding. I will go to, if there's no further speakers, Councillor Macri. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kiat and then Councillor Macri. I'm quite off my game tonight. Kiat, then Macri.
Look, I just wanted to make a few comments because I feel like this debate is at risk of getting a bit shouty or even a little unhinged. And I actually think that a lot of us are kind of on the same page in the sense that we understand that there is a legitimate debate about, what is the appropriate level of locality for this local government area. Clearly, a lot of us have disagreed in the past and may continue to disagree that the forcibly amalgamated area that we have is the wrong level of locality. And that's a really significant issue because it affects everything we do. And we're having this debate tonight, but we have it week by week and month by month as we talk about individual issues while we're trying to deal with harmonising policies, we're trying to deal with service delivery. We're having it all the time. And so in a sense, it's an ongoing debate, and the amalgamation issue, the plebiscite issue is kind of the pointy end of it. And I think a lot of good points have been made about, the need to be strategic. It's correct that the plebiscite would be non-binding. It's correct that it would be very expensive, and it may not be this. I think Councillor Porteous is correct. It's not the strategic time for us to stump up the funds to run a plebiscite that wouldn't be binding and wouldn't necessarily get us anywhere. So I think it's really essential that we actually are strategic about this and we think sensibly about it as we try to make this council work. I think it's really unfortunate that Councillor Byrne has suggested that, I assume that he's speaking of the 7 on this side, are trying to run the council into the ground. It's just not correct. It's not correct. We're committed to making this local government area work, this council work, to make it work in a way that is responsive and democratic and local.
Change the flag.
Whoa.
Change Australian
Okay.
flag.
Call the meeting to order. Call the meeting to order.
Bill Testy, you want the council to
Councillor,
work. That's all you brought
Councillor
up.
Passos, Councillor
Sorry,
Passos,
I can't
please
help it.
desist. Councillor Kiat has the floor.
I did say the debate is at risk of getting shouty, and but I think we can actually be sensible about it. And I think what Councillor Porteous has suggested is pretty sensible. You know, we probably know that it's very unlikely that the Premier is going to stump up funds for a plebiscite and a blank cheque for demerger if that were if plebiscite wanted that. But nonetheless, I think it's important to keep this part of the debate alive as we continue to have that ongoing debate about the importance of dealing with what is a really, probably the hugest event that's happened to these three local councils in the last 5 decades. You know, and we're responsible for it. So I think we need to have this debate in a sensible and reasonable way, and not try to point score one way or the other.
Okay, thank you for that.
You said she's going to lose the election.
There's no further discussion. Oh, sorry, Councillor Macri.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I'll qualify my comments by saying I work with the community 5 days a week on Marrickville Road. No one has brought deamalgamation up with me because they're not interested. I agree that some of the focuses of this council has led to a degradation of services in our LGA, and that's more due to the people that sit in this room, not Gladys or the Liberal Party. So when all three councils, we actually put up our case to be fit for the future, we all said we were fit for the future, but unfortunately we weren't. And how the decisions that have been made here, some through necessity, when people say there is no benefit or there hasn't been any improvement, well, there was a complete refurbishment of Leichhardt Town Hall because Leichhardt didn't have the money to do it. That was a benefit of the amalgamation. There's Dawn Fraser Pool, which is now going to be refurbished, which there was no budgeting for that. There was Ashfield Pool, which Ashfield Council could not afford to do the refurbishment we are doing now. There's decisions that are curious. $800,000 spent on netball courts for Leichhardt teams to go play in Haberfield when we had existing courts in Tempe that are still sitting there doing nothing. Then we have a $150,000 fee waiver for water polo teams. So, but I'll tell you one thing that definitely has improved in the Inner West. We throw the best parties of any council.
Yes.
We have the best parties, the best entertainment program of any council, and we're proud of that because that's what we tell everyone. We can throw a good party. But your footpaths, your trees, your parking, any of those things, it's not really it's not really what we're here for. That's not what we're here for. We're here to have a good time. It's a bit of a tactic that the Roman emperors used. We'll put on the games and we'll take everyone's mind off the problems that are going around. So wait, Leichhardt Oval might turn into the next Colosseum. We might have a few people thrown in with some lions and that'll be the way we run. But amalgamation isn't not a priority for this council. This priority for this council is looking after what it needs to look after and focus on the real issues that are here in front of us that I deal with every day when people come and complain to me about the trees, about the footpaths, about the roads, about actually dealing with their DAs, as the Mayor has mentioned, making it a much more friendly system for the mums and dads that struggle. Those are the things that I got on council for. Going over the same thing. We see this, it comes up every 3 months. It's like the same issue comes up and, you know, we can't control it, but we're going to talk about it and we'll chew up another hour of council's time, which could have been used for the community. That's all I'll say.
Since everybody else is going to have a go, I think, though, that you do have to admit that the amalgamated council has had to deal with multiple systems. The amalgamation has been a significant impost on the operations of the government and has impacted the service levels. Well, for a start, you could look at the DA systems. So we have now operating 4 DA systems on top of the load that's been put on staff. So
Yeah, well, don't listen
Councillor passes, if you can't assist, I'll have to adjourn the meeting. Councillor De Cruz has it.
So I think that there has been a significant impact of the amalgamation. But there are some other points that maybe could be better, but it has actually been quite problematic. I have a ward which extends across two former councils, so I get a feel of the different areas, that there's a different approach to it. I don't actually understand how repairing Leichhardt Town Hall or the Dawn Fraser Pool is a result of the amalgamation, because that is work. That's work that would have been done anyway under Leichhardt Council, as would the pool have built in Ashfield. So I actually think, I mean, the biggest thing that has happened is, in fact, the amalgamation of the systems, and the service delivery has gone down. I spent a lot of my time dealing with the customer service system, where people are trying to get through and get their faults fixed. I don't believe that the councillors did that hands-on. Well, they certainly didn't do it for me when I was in the community. I actually got things done through council directly, so they didn't have to intermediate those things. With regard to plebiscites, Lane Cove Council ran a plebiscite when they ran the council election. I think our community is entitled to have a say on whether they have been amalgamated or not. And for that reason, I support Councillor Porteous' motion, which goes to the state government and says that our community has the same rights as all the other communities which are in the Liberal electorate, such as Lane Cove, Canterbury, etc. Thank you.
Councillor Stamoulis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, in this debate, we're forgetting a couple of things. The Liberal government, the state Liberal government, cut and run on their signature policy, didn't they, Councillor Passis? They cut and run on it. They cut and run on the merger policy. They didn't proceed with it. It was going wrong for them. It was going bad for them, costing them votes, and killed them in a couple of by-elections. They made bad decisions, and it has affected their performance and affected their election result ever since. But one thing that is very, very important is every councillor tonight has listed problems with the merger. Councillor Byrne ran off a list of about 8 different things that still need. We're 3 years in. We're 3 years in, and we're still not delivering. Councillor Macri pointed out, Councillor Passis pointed out, if it was about whether this merger was functioning, it'd go down right now. Councillor De Cruz pointed that out.
Only we adopted the banner policy, it'd all be fixed.
It would go down right now on the basis of the delivery of this council and the functioning, and we're about to hear problems with our budget. The key issue here is the Labor and the Liberal Party do not want to hear from our community. You have never, ever wanted to hear from our community. You want to be the decision makers because it's all about political parties. It is all about the 2 big political parties, and you don't want to hear from our community. Why were we the only inner city council to be merged? Why did we offer up a merger? Why did the Labor and Liberal Party offer up a merger to state government? And in fact, how much does state government care about whether this merger is working? The minister's never contacted us once. We've never been called in. They don't even want to know whether this is a defining policy, a model council. Couldn't care less whether it's working for our community or not. State government, if they did impose it, rather than, as I say, we gave in on it. So I'm suggesting to you, why don't we want to listen to our people? I'm prepared to stump up. I'm prepared to put the money forward. So if you would like me to amend my motion and say council puts that money forward, more than happy to do so. So basically here, councillors, we need to stand up for our people, not politics. This is a highly political merger. It's a highly political merger, and those councillors that care about the community want to hear their voice. Those councillors that don't care about a community do not want to hear their voice at all. I want to hear their voice.
You want to consider hearing.
Okay. I speak to residents every day.
Point of order, Chair. The level of interjection here is out of control, and I'd ask you to take your role seriously.
Councillor Hesse's moved a point of order. I'm going to deal with it by moving on to the voting. There is a primary motion from Councillor Stamoulis, seconded by whom? Sorry, I can't recall. Councillor Hesse. There's then...
I did, actually, I withdrew that.
Okay, is there a seconder for the Stamoulis motion? Is there a seconder for the Stamoulis motion?
None of your mates are going to give you a second.
No seconder for Councillor Stamoulis' motion. He's completely friendless and the motion lapses. Okay, we'll move on to the foreshadowed motion from Councillor Porteous.
Why did you walk out with them last week? They're not looking after you tonight, pal.
Same motion going forward, I'm voting for it.
Councillors? Councillor Stamoulis' motion has lapsed without a seconder. There's a foreshadowed motion from Councillor Porteous, seconded by Councillor Hesse, for us to write off to the government. My foreshadowed motion is now activated, which is simply to note that it would cost $1.3 million and do nothing to hold a plebiscite. So I'll put the Porteous-Hesse motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'll use my casting vote to defeat that motion. I'll now put the foreshadowed motion to note the costs of a plebiscite. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 6. That has been carried with Councillor Kiat and this side of the chamber in support. Okay. Fun and games over. Let's move on to Councillor Porteous' motion. Item 12, notice of motion, leases and service agreements. Councillor Porteous.
Campaign on next year.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, I've received quite a lot of feedback on this particular motion, including some feedback from the CEO as well of the council. And on that sort of basis, excuse me, I have amended my original motion to incorporate that feedback, and I have provided those amendments to the minute taker. You have those in front of you? Yep, okay, great. So basically what I'm now proposing is that we bring well, obviously I think the issue of leases and the renewal of service contract particularly came to a head recently with the Annette Cullivan and the Fanny Jurek renewal of the service agreements, which came as quite a surprise to the councillors, and there was quite a short period of time in order to be able to make a decision, and it was a very significant decision as to whether we brought the services in-house or whether we continued to outsource. And I think the majority of councillors certainly felt that that was something they would have liked to have more time to have considered better, and to have been able to made a decision which properly took into consideration all of the different issues. Unfortunately, because of the very short time that we needed to indicate whether we were renewing or not that service agreement, that didn't happen. I think that we could have brought it in-house, and there was a very strong argument for us bringing that in-house, but nevertheless, I think it's illustrating that we need to get the balance right here. I also found another situation down at Bell's Foreshore where a 5-year lease was allocated to perhaps the most successful restaurateur in Sydney for something we had promised to our local community was going to be a low-scale community cafe, and in fact is going to be an upmarket, basically, restaurant now. And councillors were completely kept out of the loop. The first we knew about it was when the media release came out. So there's something that's not working there. What I'm now suggesting that we do is that we bring a report back to council for consideration at the same time as the post-exhibition report on the land and property strategy, because obviously the two are closely interrelated, and I think that we could probably get some better outcomes by looking at the way we're dealing with these leases and these service agreements at the same time as we're looking at the land and property strategy. So that's the motion that is now before you, and I would seek your support to progress that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Hesse. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor? Councillor Hesse will withhold his right to speak. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Drury.
Councillor Porteous, this seems to me to be a push for us to get involved in micromanaging aspects of the operation of this council. I don't think we have the time, and I hope we don't have the inclination, to actually deal with all the work that this would bring before this council. I think it is our job to set the overall policy parameters, not to get into the rats and mice of the decisions in relation to certainly the leasing. I want us to, as a council, set good, solid policy, not to get involved in the minutiae of the running of the council. We employ a general manager who employs staff to actually do the CEO. We employ Michael, actually. That's what happened. That's how it works. I want him to actually run the show, and we set the policy. This concerns me. This approach concerns me. Because I think for far too often in local government, and far too many councillors get caught up in the rats and mice and forget the big picture. Big picture goes to our very substantive financial issues, the very substantive financial issues that I think we should actually be looking at as to how we can better provide for our community, how we can provide for greater equity and greater opportunities for those in our community who aren't very well off, for those in our community that have circumstances such that they require some additional assistance. They're the sorts of things that I, as a Labor councillor, would like to be getting involved in, not in the ins and outs of the leases. So I'd urge everyone to vote against this.
Thank you for that. Councillor, I'll speak very briefly to the matter. I'm also against the motion. And in relation to the particular matter that's been raised by Councillor Porteous about the leasing of Fenwick Store, all the feedback that I've had from the local community is that they're very excited to have one of the best restaurateurs in Sydney located there. The council DA, which was a policy decision of the council, of the previous council, which has been carried over, doesn't allow that cafe or restaurant to operate after 5:30 p.m. So that's by any measure restrictive, and that's where the council appropriately got involved in determining how the impacts could be mitigated of a new business opening there. But I'll just note that we've spent close to $20 million on acquiring that property and on renovating it. It's one of the most iconic locations in Sydney, let alone in Balmain. And for us to enter into a lease that brings a good public use that will be enjoyed by the local community and makes a return for the council is just common sense. I honestly have not encountered a single person who's opposed to it. We've already made a decision quite some time ago about whether we wanted to bring very small matters to council for endorsement in relation to tenders and leases, and we got detailed advice about it at the time, and we concluded in the end that we would limit it to matters that were larger than $2 million in value. Is that right, or did we reduce it to 1.5? 1.5 we reduced it to. The officers recommended 2 million, we brought that down. If we are struggling to get through the business as it is, we've got a new CEO who's making a concerted effort to try and adopt new processes that allow us to get through matters and to get involved in strategic decision making at the beginning of the process rather than at the end. If we make a decision tonight that we're going to bring forward every small lease for every council property to this meeting for determination, we're creating a rod for our own backs. We'll be spending many more hours here focusing on very small-scale decision-making rather than the really big challenges which some councillors have identified as being a lethal challenge to the council's viability. So I really think this would be a very significant setback for the council were we to decide that we were going to start micromanaging the officers' decisions in relation to leases. There's a policy decision for us to be made about how we want our leases to benefit the community, and that matter will be coming back to council, and let's focus on that, get that right, and then let the officers do their job. Councillors, further discussion?
Could I just make a point of order? The minute taker actually had the wrong motion up, so I just want to clarify to councillors that the motion you were reading previously was not the right motion. That one you're reading now is the right motion. It was the one I spoke to, but they put the previous version.
Understood. Councillor Kiat.
I think that the motion as now is on the screen should address some of the concerns that have been expressed, which is, I guess, this is responding to the issue that we had with Fanny Durack and Annette Kellerman. I think everyone I spoke to, or most of the people I spoke to about that, did think that with greater notice, we could have come to a different and better decision. I think that's where this is coming from, and it's not really the rats and mice. That was the extension of a 3-year privatisation of those services. So that's pretty significant, and obviously for a Labor councillor, very significant, and for all of us. I guess what this is looking for is when we have the land and property strategy come back, let's have another discussion about exactly how we can make sure that those big issues about leases and outsourcing come back to us so that we can have input on those high-level strategic issues. And I think all of us know that there are some leases and licenses that are not as important, but there are some that are, and that it is useful to have our high-level direction on. So I don't think that we're asking for anything more than that, and I think we all recognise that that it is an important issue because we all complained about it when Fanny Durack and Annette Kellerman came up. So I don't really understand the complaint here when all this is asking for is for staff to consider this and report back.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillors, any further discussion before I go to Councillor Porteous for her right of reply? Councillor Stamoulis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be supporting the Porteous Hesse motion. And the reason is that unlike some other councillors tonight who've expressed views that we shouldn't have oversight on some of these very important strategies and some of these big decisions that are made about our property and our assets, and some of these things that a board should be doing and a governance board should be doing, looking at the things that entail possible levels of fraud and risk in many councils and many institutions today we're seeing. I would think that we should be taking a very, very valid and strong interest in oversight rather than deflecting it and brushing it aside, such as Councillor Drury would suggest that we do. We are a board. We are a board and we should take our responsibilities, our due diligence. If that involves an extra report and an extra bit of work to demonstrate to our public that we do take their land, their property, their financial management very, very seriously, I'll take on that extra report on behalf of my community. And yes, the decision about the Fenwick store should have absolutely come to councillors before any final decision was made on that. I'm surprised that council immediately went to the biggest operator in town for a local community building. I'm very surprised that occurred, and it would have been nice to have known that before it occurred. But I take my responsibility seriously. I don't want to deflect those like Councillor Drury does. If it means an extra report, I'm happy to take that on board.
Councillor Porteous.
Yes, addressing the Councillor Drury's concerns about this becoming a minutiae operation, that's absolutely not what it is intended. And I thought it would make that pretty clear where it talks about significant leases, licence and agreement on council property that are brought to councils for consultation. These are the significant ones because they are ones which are of particular concern to the local community. And I think we're all of those of us who are experienced councillors have spent many hours consulting on what would be the preferred kind of operator in a lot of our council buildings, and we've heard quite clearly from our community what their expectations are. In terms of our own accountability back to our community, there is, I think, an argument that we do need to follow through on those consultations and to ensure that we are delivering for them. And I think there is a role for councillors. That's why I'm proposing a report, because this report, I think, would help us to understand better how we can get the balance right. I think that at the currently we don't have the balance right. It's because essentially when I asked how many new leases or renewal of leases were currently coming to council, the answer was 0. So to me, there's something wrong with 0. Maybe it is that, maybe there's 10 that should come to council. Maybe there should be 20. Maybe there should be more. But some sort of parameter I think we need to establish as to what is for us a significant and important lease agreement that we feel we would like to have further input on. Because otherwise, essentially, the way we're leaving it with staff at the moment is they have no requirement to even inform us of the fact that they're allocating leases, potentially even quite long leases, on our council property, and we could find ourselves with different organisations using our property that we perhaps don't think is a good match for the expectations of the local community, and we currently have no opportunity to have any input into that at all. And I do think there's something wrong with that. So I'm trying to address that, and as I said, what I was proposing is to have that come back with the land and property strategy so that we look at it in a holistic way, and we try and find a way as a council to again address some of the challenges that we're facing with this amalgamated council, so that we get the balance right, because I think in our heart of hearts we probably would all agree the balance is not right at the moment. So I would ask that councillors do support this motion, because I do think that the intention there is clear as to what we're seeking, what I'm sort of seeking to get as a better outcome for council.
Councillor Porteous, just in the interest of acting collegiately and in consensus, and I acknowledge that you've already made your right of reply, but I'm just trying to progress this. So it's quite different what you're proposing now to what was on the books. You were proposing that all leases for longer than 12 months come to council for endorsement. Now you're essentially requesting an additional component in the report that will come back on the land and property strategy anyway. Okay.
That's what I spoke to, but it didn't come up. Can
I have some clarification?
Okay, we're going a bit outside the code of meeting practice, that's okay?
I apologise for not being here, it's my fault.
Yeah.
If you could indulge with me. I really don't understand this, because I do have concerns with council staff making decisions on community centres. That's where my problem is. So I really don't know what this motion covers. So I suppose I'm going to have to vote for this motion, because I really like to know what's going on. I like to know who's leasing what, and as far as community centres are concerned, I've raised this on numerous occasions about a few of our community centres. I don't like staff making decisions, who uses our community centres and who goes in them. Because we're close to the community, we know what works and what doesn't, and we have people in community centres that are not delivering a thing in the best interest of our ratepayers. So, as much as I do not want to support this motion, I'm going to have to, if I'm sincere in my concern for the area.
Okay, I think we've actually got consensus now, given the change to the motion. It's a significant new addition to the report that would be coming back from the land and property strategy anyway. Indicate my support for it. I'll put the Porteous motion. All those in favour? All those against? That has been carried unanimously. Last notice of motion, ALGA National General Assembly. Councillor Porteous.
Through the chair, I would request if the manager for governance and executive support could indicate if he has any spoken to ALGA as to whether they would accept this motion as a late motion, as it has exceeded the 29th deadline.
Perhaps I can respond, Councillor. We've spoken with Australian Local Government Association Executive today. They are considering late motions tomorrow, so there's still time to get this matter on the agenda.
Yeah. So look, I'll just speak really briefly to this. I think it's quite an important motion for us to bring to ALGA. It's a very pertinent issue currently, air pollution, and I think that it would have a lot of support right across Australia, because we're seeing a lot of our cities impacted on by air pollution, and particularly when we're looking at the PM 2.5 and the issue around what is a safe level of 2.5 and how that impacts on the quality of life and the health of people that are going to have high levels of 2.5 in their immediate environment. I mean, obviously it impacts on us locally with big infrastructure projects like Westconnex, but equally you could nominate many, many locations right across Sydney and New South Wales and right across Australia where there are similar impacts. And again, because of this PM 2.5, which currently has a ruling of a safe level, which it would be good to have that addressed, as well as looking at, what other steps can be taken by the federal government to protect vulnerable people, school children being particularly of concern. So I would like to see us bring this to the ALGA National General Assembly. As I said, I think it will get quite strong support, and that we could also be helpful for us in our local environment.
I do, Chair, and I'll speak to it briefly if I can. I'd like to support Councillor Porteous' motion. I would bring to Council's attention that there was a report on the news today that the Greater City of London Council has today introduced measures to prevent high pollution emitting vehicles from entering the City of London unless on pain of a significant charge. And I have to say that's a progressive move, because they too are concerned about the impact of air pollution in their city. I'd add to that, I'm not sure how many councils read. It was a Labor Mayor, Sadiq Khan, I believe. That's right, and I support the Labor Mayor of Greater City of London in his actions. Quite seriously, I don't know how many people read the article in the Saturday paper last Saturday. The article there pointed out the quality of fuel we use in our cars in Australia is very poor. The quality of air we enjoy our cities is poorer than most other Western nations. And at the moment, I'm glad to say, I'm sure that the majority of councillors in this room at this time are on a unity ticket. We need to be moving towards electric vehicles, better public transport, and of course promoting riding and walking as much as we can. This motion, I think, speaks to all those things. And I agree with Councillor Porteous. I think for those far-sighted councillors around this country, this will be an important way we at local government level contribute to that national debate on how we live in our cities and how we deliver a better quality of life. And we push in a more sensible direction away from the old polluting model that has blighted our cities for quite some time now. I hope all councillors will support the motion. Thank you.
I wish to propose an amendment or a foreshadowed motion, which I think can strengthen the proposal a little bit. You've got to be very conscious when you go to state local government conferences or national local government conferences that mayors and councillors in Western Australia or far north Queensland don't know about Westconnex, let alone care about it. And so it's important to try and take a national perspective. So I'd like to suggest that ALGA call on the federal government to release all reports, submissions and analysis, including health studies, on all major infrastructure projects in the future and to all current projects under construction, which would include Westconnex, but not limited to Westconnex. And I think it's more likely that the motion will be added to the agenda and successful if we can broaden it to include the interests of councillors all over Australia rather than the interest specifically of the Inner West in relation to Westconnex. So I'll propose that, and I'd be happy to vote with Councillor Porteous if she would like to incorporate it.
I think that would be great to incorporate that into the primary motion.
As a replacement for point 3?
We could take out Westconnex. I mean, it doesn't have to be in there. Or we could adapt. Yeah, we could adapt point 3
Excellent.
Yeah, let's substitute. Yeah.
Councillor Passos.
Well, I'm voting against this motion because these things are already in place. This is, again, wasting time. That's all it's doing. Whoever's going to the conference, good luck to you.
Okay, I'll put the Porteous motion with point 3 replaced with the foreshadowed motion. Move Porteous, seconded Hesse. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. Councillors, there's one mayoral minute which doesn't require debate. I've withdrawn the previous mayoral minute, which is about de-amalgamation, which is redundant. I've tabled a motion about the Richard Gill commemoration. Councillor York and I have been liaising with a number of local music organisations and residents who want to progress. The project requires no resources from council. It's really just an update that they've identified that Make Music Day on June 21 could be an opportunity for all local schools to record a musical performance in honour of Richard Gill. If no one needs to speak against that, I will simply move it.
Can I just get a clarification?
I'll take Councillor Passis's question in a moment. Councillor Porteous.
Look, I strongly support the proposal. I just was curious as to funding on it, where that would be accessed from. I presume that has been considered.
An email is free, so there's no funding required. I'm happy to speak to it if it requires detailed explanation, but I don't believe it does. It's literally an update. Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Declare that. Okay, declare that carried. I'll move that we move into, what's the correct terminology? Closed session. Confidential session.
Could you please tell everyone to leave the gallery?
Everyone? Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor York. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. I'll move adoption of the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Drury. Anyone who wishes to speak against it? If not, I'll put that. All those in favour? Sorry, Councillor De Cruz.
I raised some questions.